Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining us. We're going to get started in just a moment. There's plenty of seats in the front. Welcome, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us during your lunch hour during such a busy week. We're really excited to share these new resources with you. And we'll get started with Ms. Ana Peralta, the IPPC Capacity Development Officer, introducing the session and getting us started. Thank you.
Thanks, Sonia. Again, welcome to everybody to this first session of the CPM 10 on the capacity development manuals. This is a particular session to launch a set of manuals related to NPPO management and NPPO establishment. We are going to have 3 consecutive sessions during this CPM. And I'm going to give now some organizational details. In this meeting room, the session is recorded. I need to warn that to everybody, because later the session is going to be posted in our phytosanitary resources page to make it available to everybody that could not be present here in Rome. I suspect that nobody is going to oppose to be filmed. If somebody is opposed, we are going to have serious suspicions on the behavior, okay? Then stay where you are, and we are going to proceed. Second big issue that is linked to the recording of the session is that you need to talk using a microphone. If after the presentations you have questions, our kind messengers are going to run close to you and give you the microphone. But don't speak before, because nobody's going to know which was your question if you don't use the microphone. And the third reminder is that it's quite important also to know who is posing a question. And then we are going to request to all of you that when you perform any questions, you introduce yourself or your country. Well, we are here presenting this activity that is a joint activity of the Capacity Development Committee and the IPPC Secretariat Capacity Development Area. Maybe not everybody is aware of the way in which we work. The 2 of us, we work. The CDC is our oversight body, and the capacity development team in the Secretariat is the one charged to work for them, for getting their approval and under its strict oversight and approval. Then it's a little different to other bodies in the IPPC system, and there is a lot more pressure on the Secretariat working directly in producing things, and a lot of pressure in the Capacity Development Committee in giving us a very direct oversight. We have different types of materials in development. Don't believe that we only produce manuals. One of the big principles in the capacity development area that the CDC explained it to us, it was Sally Jennings that did that, is that nothing is going to get dust on a shelf. And then we don't want manuals to really be collected in a shelf. We produce the manuals as the basis for other things, for e-learnings, for training kits, and we also control very, very strictly the use of the manuals, and we should welcome any information coming from our contracting parties on the possible use that you do, on which are your main interests on further developments. We have collected that in many cases. If you remember, last year we presented to all of you a manual on market access. That manual on market access was used by different organizations, and we have received direct recommendations to develop, for instance, an e-learning training course based on that manual, and that e-learning is going to be used by one of the main FAO departments, the Department of Economics and Statistics, for training in many regions of the world. Then we welcome the suggestions on what to do with the manual to don't get any dust, okay? Later, I have also to remind that today we are discussing specifically the contents of the NPPO management and establishment manuals. But all what we are producing is like a Lego, a game with building blocks, and you can use what we produce under the SDDF project for different purposes, for different activities, and we can mix the building blocks with different intentions. These two manuals, for instance, together with the last one that you are going to see this week, the one on relationships of the NPPO with the stakeholders, are a perfect set to set an NPPO, to give guidance on how to set an NPPO that is fully linked with the reality and it's totally compatible with the IPPC obligations and rights. The manuals are going to be available around mid-July, totally available totally posted in our phytosanitary resource page. And today we will discuss the content and announce the opportunities involved with these two manuals. You have, all of you, received a fact sheet, okay, on them. On this particular one, you are going to see a fact sheet like this for every manual we present in this week. In the back, you have some reminders on the use of the phytoresources page, and up front, the description of the manuals and its contents, okay, for full understanding of what we are doing. I'm not going to take more time because Sonia is paying a lot of attention to the use of time, okay? And I believe that maybe we can introduce the other members of the table, okay?
Thank you, Anna. We're so glad to have everyone with us today presenting. We have Sally Jennings, one of our Capacity Development Committee members, here with us today. Kenza Lamentek from the Standards and Trade Development Facility, the primary donor for the project that we're discussing today. Jeff Jones, the lead author of the materials on NPPO establishment and operations that we'll be discussing. Ana Peralta, the IPPC Capacity Development Officer. I'm Sonia Hammonds, Agricultural Officer with the IPPC Secretariat. And I'd also like to introduce current and former Capacity Development Committee members who are with us in the room, because they have done so much work to get us to where we are today with these and other materials, and are continuing to do so much work. So I just want to point them out. Corné van Alphen, our former CDC chair, if you can wave your hand, who has done so much work. Magda Gonzalez, our new member from Latin America and the Caribbean, who's been extremely active. We're really grateful. Sam Bishop from Europe. Mark, are you here? Mark will be joining us from North America. So as Anna mentioned, the CDC is extremely active in their work, and we're really appreciative of that, and we encourage you to discuss your questions with them. Before we get to the content of these particular manuals, I'd like to take the opportunity to step back for a moment and share with you some of the broader context of the materials that are already available and those that are coming up that will be made available during the next year, because there's really a huge range of resources that are already available and so many opportunities for you to be involved in the next steps. So we wanted to provide some of this overview. All of the materials that we're discussing today are either already on or will soon be on the phytosanitary resources page. Could I get a show of hands of how many of you have already had the chance to visit this page, the phytosanitary resources page? So about half. That's great. So for those of you who've already visited, go back because there's already new things today, and go frequently because there are new things all the time because the CDC is always working. And for those of you who have not yet had a chance to visit, we really encourage you to do so because there are hundreds of resources there, and we'll get into those details right now. So briefly, I'm going to provide a bit of an overview of what materials are available, why they were developed, and how you can be involved in the next steps. So we'll go through this briefly. The phytosanitary resources page, which has a bit of a different look and feel than the IPP. It looks like this. And it has many kinds of materials. There are manuals, presentations, manuals developed by the IPPC Secretariat with Capacity Development Committee, manuals developed by national governments, case studies, photos, but generally we can say there are two types of materials. There are IPPC technical resources, which are developed through the IPPC Secretariat under the direction of the IPPC Capacity Development Committee. That's one type of material available on the page. The other type of material available are contributed resources. And these are resources contributed by many of you in this room and many others who've suggested, you know, our country has a manual that might be useful for others. We have advocacy material that we spent a lot of time and energy developing. Maybe it could be a useful basis for someone else. And all of those materials have been suggested, and the CDC has been so busy all year long, for over 2 years, reviewing these materials based on a set of criteria to select the ones that are most appropriate, that are consistent with IPPC and aligning with these criteria, so that you know that the materials on this page have been reviewed and have been designated as being useful for you. So that's what we have available there. Now, why are we doing this? It's really a lot of work. Well, we really have all of your needs in mind, and we're working to make progress in progressing the work plan and strategy of capacity development that the CPM adopted a few years ago. Now, we know that many of you have needs in common. Many of you have expressed needs for materials on surveillance, on NPPO management, for example. And so the idea is that rather than each of you developing your own manual from the beginning, hiring your own consultants, developing your own project to start from the very, very beginning, thinking about what content to include, that we would develop with a common basis, a common core set of materials that you can then adapt for the needs specific to your country, your region, and your context. So that's the idea that we're working on here. So we encourage all of you to reflect on the kinds of materials that you may need in your situation, and to take a look at what materials are already available and how you can work with those and work on taking those existing materials to the next step rather than starting anew. So when you're thinking about developing projects or working together on bilateral aid programs, for example, to think about these resources that have been made available with a lot of technical expertise, a lot of peer review process made available for you. A little bit more about the materials developed by the IPPC and the IPPC Secretariat and Capacity Development Committee. The idea is for these materials to address gaps. The CDC has been really clear that they want to work specifically on the areas where existing materials are not already available. Focusing on materials that are globally relevant, that could be potentially used by anyone. What that means is that for them to be especially useful for you, that you would need to do some work too. You would need to do the work to take a globally relevant piece of material and make it specifically useful for you, but that a lot of the foundation is already available. Now, a little bit more on the process. The CDC went through a long process to decide which materials to develop and how to develop them. There was a needs identification process using a combination of secretariat experience from capacity development projects over many years, CDC member experience in capacity development projects for many years, as well as the results from your responses to the implementation review and support system surveys, the IRSS surveys. So all of that time and energy that you spent responding to these surveys, the CDC was listening and analyzed those responses to think about what kinds of needs were coming up in many cases. That was combined with an analysis of existing resources. A couple of years ago, the CDC asked the Secretariat to issue a call for existing resources, and we asked all NPPOs, all RPPOs, and others to please send us your manuals, send us your standard operating procedures, send us your existing materials so that we know what's out there and we don't start from the beginning. So the CDC did an analysis of the needs, analysis of existing resources, set priorities, and then worked on the next steps for developing the materials with extensive technical input and peer review. Now that we get to the launch, we're talking about the next steps for cooperation. And now is the opportunity for you to be involved, because we consider the publication of these materials to be really the beginning. Because what these materials are here for is to be used. And that's where we're looking for your input and your involvement on the next steps, everything from being involved in developing workshops, printing the materials, but also letting us know how you use them, letting us know the case studies from your country that could be used as supplementary materials to enhance the understanding of the content we're discussing. So the publication of these materials we don't see as the end of this activity, but rather the beginning. And we're really looking forward to your involvement, your feedback, and collaboration on the next steps. So that's about the IPPC developed materials. The other set of materials are those submitted by you. We're always open to your additional contributions, and this is where the CDC works so hard on reviewing the materials before selecting the ones to make available on the phytosanitary resources page. And these are some examples of materials already available, so we'd like to thank IECA and STDF and USDA and many others who have made their materials available on this site for you to be able to find them. I'm going to skip ahead just for time. The idea of the resources, just like Anna mentioned, is that they can be fit together in different pieces. Some of them you can use, we expect you can use directly as they are. Others, you can take the main content of the material and adapt them as you need them to create more interactive kinds of materials, develop presentations and workshop materials based on the manuals, for example, and also use them in combination. So, for example, today we're discussing a manual on establishing and operating an NPPO. Tomorrow evening we'll be discussing one on managing relationships with stakeholders. These three themes work really well together, so there's a lot of opportunity to fit these pieces together in various ways. The types of resources are a whole range. We have full e-learning courses available. We have other e-learning courses that are in development. There are videos, databases, a roster of consultants. There's really a lot there. So we encourage you to look at it. And for any questions, please see us in the Secretariat or Capacity Development Committee members who identified themselves at the beginning. In the next few months, you can look forward to a whole range of new materials. There's going to be more on surveillance, more on how to participate effectively in IPPC meetings, more on market access, as well as these three manuals that we're discussing now, which will be made available in July. So all of that is up and coming. For now, we're going to focus on the details of some of the materials related to NPPO management. So I'll ask Dr. Jeff Jones to take the lead on sharing the contents of this manual. Thank you.
Thank you, Sonia, and glad to see all of you here today. Why a manual on NPPO establishment, or why a manual on NPPO or operationalization of an NPPO? You would know that one of the key obligations of contracting parties is to establish a national plant protection organization that is the official competent authority in plant protection, that is legally responsible for all the activities as outlined in the IPPC and a framework for international cooperation. Now, I think the length and breadth of this statement is not fully understood, and it shows in the variations that we see in organizational models or institutional frameworks that exist in various countries. It is still heartbreaking, for example, to see, to go to a country and find that border or quarantine activities is not handled by or is not under the domain of the National Plant Protection Organization, or even the Ministry of Agriculture. And I'm not exaggerating here. I can give you examples. It is still heartbreaking for me to see that fruits and vegetables are regulated by Ministry of Health. Why? Can they do pest risk analysis on fruits and vegetables? It is still heartbreaking for me to see the number of conflicts that arise internally because of overlapping mandates, etc., etc., and I can go on. So there is a solid basis for giving guidance on how to establish an NPPO and how to have it operationalized. As Sonia said, this was one of the manuals, these were manuals listed among the priorities of NPPO. Existing models, they tend to reflect current competencies, resources, and perhaps the level of understanding of the requirements to fulfill the functions of an NPPO. And because of this, some of the models are not ideal. I think NPPO has expressed the need for guidance on establishing or creating a relevant institution to fulfill the obligations under the IPPC. Institutional arrangements as well as legal and policy considerations are often barriers to the effectiveness and the efficiency of current organizations, many of them anyway. So this manual really addresses some of the issues dealing with implementation, establishment of an effective organization, and I know you will find it useful. What does the manual really cover? It looks at the international framework, for example, relationship between SPS bodies, and it looks at potential linkages with implementation in collaboration with other relevant international bodies. The chapter on National Plant Protection Organizations, the concept is explained there quite well, looking at also the legal basis and the rights and obligations of contracting parties under the IPPC. The heart of the manual, I think, exists in chapters 4, 5, and 6. In chapter 4, there are considerations for establishing and maintaining an NPPO. The establishment of an NPPO obviously has to relate to the mandate of the NPPO as defined by the IPPC. The idea of legal considerations or legal authorization as underpinning all of the activities of the NPPO cannot be understated. And so many NPPOs are constrained by inappropriate legislation, inappropriate legal considerations. They're also constrained by policy decisions or policy framework, so that the manual takes you through a list of legal considerations that must be taken into account, as well as policy considerations that would release those kinds of constraints that we are seeing at the moment. So that policy should really set out broad goals of action, a course of action to address phytosanitary risks, for example, or define public goals and how these goals could be achieved. But we don't have those policy considerations in our NPPO. Chapter 5 deals with the actual structure of our NPPO in relation to its functions. So, what do you think about when you're establishing an appropriate NPPO? Many of us are left with structures from the past. By past, I mean before the IPPC came into force. We had structures, basically quarantine regulatory structures. What the IPPC has brought to bear on those structures is like a new order of things, a new range of obligations, which now those old structures cannot sustain or maintain. And so many of us are still saddled with those old institutional frameworks or organizations. I have included in this manual several models of NPPOs that I see out there. And so in this regard, I want you to try to think or reflect on your own institution and how these things might apply to you or your institution. The issue of positioning the NPPO in the national context. This I think, has serious implications. Many countries, there are no linkages between the NPPO and other bodies that can assist in regulating import, exports, surveillance, a range of activities. It's like some NPPOs are just there by themselves without any consideration for resources that are around them, how these resources can be useful. So that you have other border agencies, you have international bodies, you have ministries, you have private sector groups. How many of us tap in on these things? How many of us have relationships with professional institutions, for example? And we do need that kind of technical support. So the manual looks at some of those things. The manual also investigates mechanisms of funding and the role of the NPPO in accessing funds. Sometimes, and now I'm thinking most of us here are NPPOs, technical people. But if you are a technical boss, it is not good to sit back and allow what is allocated to you through a national budget without having adequate support for the funding you need to comfortably run an NPPO. So there is a role for the NPPO. It deals with accreditation or approval processes. In many cases, if not in most cases, we do need partners. How do you engage partners? What are the rules or instruments of engagement so that our partners are accountable in being, in providing the kind of support that we need? And there is a section on mechanisms of enforcement. So the basic package deals with some core issues that you will face in either establishing or improving your National Plant Protection Organization. Okay, so how should the manual be used, basically? You can see it as an abbreviated, it provides an abbreviated checklist of key legal and policy considerations, provisions, and these underpin the operational aspects of an NPPO. You can see it as a mirror of your own NPPO and the limitations that could be addressed, or you can see it as a guide to establishing an appropriate organization consistent with what you want to, consistent with IPPC recommendations. So I want you to reflect. Maybe some of us are stuck with the old institutional framework where there's a plant quarantine or regulatory section within plant protection. That has its pros and cons. Many of you might identify with this. Some of you might be in an organization where it's the Ministry of Agriculture that is designated as the NPPO in legislation. But then that in itself creates problems, but there are also opportunities. Probably requires like administrative tools to ensure effective collaboration among the functional units. You might want to you might think, well, maybe, okay, my institution is semi-autonomous, maybe it's autonomous, maybe it's part of a broader SPS framework, whatever your circumstances are, there is an analysis of what might be advantages and disadvantages of those kinds of institutions. If you have an institution that I have not named, you can say, well, ours is this, and you have mentioned that. That would be nice. Okay. So you can use it as a guide in that way. It also can be used as a guide to important internal as well as external relationships and resources that may be tapped to boost effectiveness of the organization. During this week, you will be hearing a lot on stakeholder relations, and we recognize that a relationship between the NPPO and key institutions or personnel, that's very important. So that's basically the package on the establishment aspects. And if you have any questions, please feel free to ask. Now, I see the operationalization of an NPPO as a companion document. A manual in itself, but a companion document. It provides, for example, a strategic framework necessary for operationalizing, maintaining, and reviewing structural and administrative components of an NPPO. That's a lot of words there, but if you read the manual, you would find out, you'd gain a lot from that. It deals with capacities necessary to drive a fully functional NPPO. It helps you to prioritize and implement phytosanitary programs. What are the core programs? How do we go about establishing these programs? And again, it does detail how you engage stakeholders in specific functions of the NPPO. This manual may be used as a tool to guide meaningful collaboration. And I stress collaboration. In too many countries, you are existing as an island unto yourself, and that's not help. You can use both of these manuals, in fact. And again, I'm thinking that you're technical people, but technical managers must relate problems and issues to their policymakers. And so if using these manuals could help you in discussing your national issues or your national situation to improve your effectiveness and efficiency, that would be something very profitable for you. Determine how your core functions may be implemented, managed, and the requirements necessary to do so. So I urge you to use these manuals, give us feedback, as Sonia has already said, and I hope they prove useful to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. And we're also excited to announce that in addition to the manuals themselves, we'll also be releasing around July companion training material that will also be available. And like we mentioned, we see all of these materials as really being the first step of a set of core materials that can then be adapted into even more interactive training and utilization-based materials for you in the next steps. So we're excited to discuss these opportunities with you. And it's also great to hear how these themes link to discussions we've heard this week at CPM. For example, in this room last night, there was discussion about the need to ensure that the NPPO's legal basis would allow for electronic phytosanitary certification, for example. So we think of the materials in this manual being relevant not only for establishing an NPPO, but for ongoing maintenance and ensuring that the legal and policy elements are appropriately aligned. So with that, I'd like to introduce Ms. Sally Jennings, our Capacity Development Committee member, to introduce herself.
Hi there. It's I've just been introduced. I'm Sally Jennings, and as you can see in very big letters at the front, it's really a great pleasure to be here today, to be here presenting this particular manual. As all the panel have actually talked to you about already, the CDC has been very much involved in this process, and for me personally, one of the principal reasons for getting involved in capacity development was the desire to really give something practical to country members to actually be able to implement the ISPMs in a much more practical way. Often, you know, we have documents that are presented and we're told go off and implement that, but there really has not been enough information that gives that practical, hands-on, oh, this is how I do it step by step. So it's been just so rewarding being part of this whole process. As also mentioned, we're very much involved in reviewing these products as they come through the various different stages, and there's a lot of toing and froing, and just, you know, to give a little bit of an idea of what the CDC do on a regular basis. It is a 12-month commitment. It's not just, you know, you can do something for a couple of months, then you have your meeting, and then you don't have to think about it for a while. We get emails all the time with documents all the time for us to review and put forward our comments. In terms of the phytosanitary page, you know, we have to review at least 5 items per month. And if we don't, we get a very gentle reminder of the IPPC Secretariat to say, time for doing that review, please. So from that perspective, it's a very hard-working committee, but I know that I speak for all of my colleagues on that committee. It is actually very worthwhile, and we're really excited to see, you know, the fruition of all that hard work and effort that has gone towards this. And I'd especially like to thank the Secretariat. Yeah, we are a committee of 7 people, but we couldn't do what we do to the standard that we do it without their support and their constant, you know, helping us and ensuring that we stay on track. So I'd just like to say a really big thank you to the Secretariat for that. I think it's really puts you out there as an excellent support. So that's enough from me. I was given 1 or 2 minutes, and I'm sure I've done more than that. So I really hope you enjoy the manuals, and look forward to getting your feedback as to how you find them, and future tools that we'll develop alongside that.
Thank you so much, Sally. Kenza, we'd love to hear from you as well.
Thank you. I was asked to say a few words on actually the perspective of the STDF Secretariat on the STDF 350 project, or the IPPC manuals project in general, and then on the materials that are presented today specifically. I was asked to give this perspective as the main funding source for this project. But actually what I would like to start by explaining is that the STDF is not a donor in a classical meaning of the word. The STDF is a partnership of 5 international organizations that with very specific expertise in SPS and trade issues, capacity building particularly, who bring together their expertise and share it into this platform, which is the STDF, platform of exchange of information on capacity building, but also on coordination of capacity development initiatives. In addition, the STDF has a small trust fund attached to it to develop projects and also to implement them. And precisely because the trust fund that is attached to the STDF partnership is very small, the process of getting project funded is highly competitive. And perhaps some people present in the room have gone through the process and know how painful it is to get projects approved. Why I'm saying this is to share with you the fact that for projects to be approved for funding by the STDF, they have to comply with specific numbers or with a big number of criteria, and these criteria include the fact that they have to have the highest potential in terms of reaching the maximum number of beneficiaries, and they have to be innovative, they have to be collaborative, they have to be cost effective, they have to set or use best practice in capacity development. And if we were to tick boxes for these criteria, with regard to this specific STDF 350 project, then I would say that this project would score full marks, and it had actually, and that's why it received funding from the STDF. So this project for us addresses critical need, which is the how to implement countries' obligations under the convention, and how to implement ISPMs. So it doesn't really tell you the theory, it leads you through various scenarios, through the materials that are produced under the project, through various scenarios, and how to get things done. And we believe that this is an absolute good practice in terms of how to develop capacities of NPPOs. In addition, this project has other aspects of good practice in the sense that it didn't start from scratch, as it was explained before me by Sonia. It started first by taking stock of existing resources, existing manuals. It also it reached out to NPPOs, but it also set priorities based on connections with other areas of implementation of the IPPC, for example, through identifying the needs through the IRSS surveys, but also through linking up with the ongoing priorities for standard setting, for example, the manual on dielectric heat treatment. So in this sense, we see this project as really a great example in terms of how to implement capacity development projects that other areas of capacity development, like food safety and also animal health, can learn a great deal from. We also think that this project has set good practice in terms of the collaborative effort that was put into it, collaboration with expert groups, for example, the International Advisory Group on PRA, also all the input and the efforts that was put in it by the CDC members and other NPPOs beyond the CDC who contributed materials and who contributed also in the elaboration of new materials. And I would say, as a funding source for this project, that we consider this project to be flagship project for the STDF, and it brings a great value for money, because after all, the STDF has put a little more than $500,000 into it, and the materials that were collected and that came out of this project are so far just impressive. And this is thanks to the invaluable contribution of the CDC, as Sally has just mentioned, and also thanks to the leadership and the slave-driving skills of the IPPC Secretariat, I would say. And with the specific focus on this material that is presented today, and also on the NPPO stakeholder relation that will be presented tomorrow, I would say that from our perspective, this is a total paradigm shift in the way we address capacity development needs in the SPS area. Because when we think about capacity development needs in the SPS area, and particularly in the phytosanitary area, we think about technical needs, we think about surveillance, certification, reporting, we think about diagnosis, etc. But we don't necessarily think of the foundations of phytosanitary competencies. We think of management competencies as possibly satellite skills that may or may not affect the implementation of the obligations of that contracting party has under the convention. But although these are not technical by nature, we think that these are core competencies that need to be strengthened if we were to achieve sustainable upgrade of technical NPPO capacity. I mean, we just heard from Jeff all the aspects of NPPO management and establishment. Management is about planning, it's about priority setting, it's about streamlining resource allocation, it's about achieving results, it's about having a vision and sharing it all the way through from the inspector to the NPPO director. And unless you have your house in order, all the quick fixes in terms of technical capacity can only have limited success. And this makes me think of a French expression. I don't know if translating it to English means anything at all, but as we say, all these quick fixes, if you don't have the foundation, would be like putting a plaster on a wooden leg, basically. For reasons that we all know, which are staff turnover, inefficient use of resources, lack of accountability, etc. And that's why I was I started by saying that for us, these set of manuals are a real paradigm shift in the way we address NPPO capacity needs, and we would really I would join my colleagues here to hope that you would be fully using them and improving them and giving your feedback. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kenza. So before we conclude, I just wanted to highlight where you can find all of these materials. This is the phytosanitary resources page. The address is phytosanitary.info, I-N-F-O. And this is where you can find over 300 materials that are currently available. We mentioned the two categories. IPPC technical resources, where you can find the manuals and training materials that are already available. And you can see that there's a long list of materials that are not yet linked because they're on their way, and that will become populated in the next few months, so it's an exciting time. But there is a lot there already. And then there are also the contributed resources that have been submitted by all of you and others and reviewed by the CDC. And here there are hundreds of resources, lots of diagnostic protocols from EPO, from NAPO, from others, photos, manuals, pest information, all kinds of information. And we highlight that we are actively seeking further contributions to this page. So if you have additional manuals or a case study, an example from your country that could be useful to supplement the market access manual, for example, we really welcome that. So we want to highlight that. And again, thank you so much to the CDC members who have been so heavily involved in this whole process. We'll move on to questions. We'll have time for just 2 or 3 questions. Before we get started, I'll address a couple of questions that I think will probably come up immediately. When will the materials be available? These ones probably in July, and they'll be available on this webpage. Printing and translation are not covered by this project. So that is an opportunity for partnerships and working together. We're appreciative to Republic of Korea that has already expressed interest in supporting printing of some of the materials, and we encourage others to consider being involved in that way, or for those of you working with projects to consider how you could incorporate translation or printing into existing or future projects. Those are a couple of key questions, as well as next steps. Feedback for ongoing further development of the materials is always welcome. There is a link at the beginning of each of the materials and on the website and on the back of this fact sheet, where there is a very, very simple survey, 2 questions, where you can provide your feedback, and the CDC reviews that on a regular basis. So those are a few points. A couple of questions.
Yes, I will try to be very short. Ringo Cernic from Latvia. I would like to congratulate the EPO Secretariat for this job, because several years ago several EPO members requested to write down something with the best structure and to cover all functions which should NPPO performed. And now I see that this was taken up by the IPPC Secretariat. I believe that in those manuals authors put the best knowledge which they have. Pretty sure that there is no the best structure, but there is structure which probably fits for everyone around this room. So therefore I would like to thank IPPC Secretariat, team of authors, and also STDDF for understanding and providing resources for those manuals. So I hope that those manuals will be very valid for each NPPO, even in developed countries. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Roger Day from CAB International, CABI, the regional office in Kenya, in East Africa. I'd also like to congratulate the chief slave driver and her slaves, Sally and her team, Jeff for writing it, and Kenza for writing the check. These are exactly the kind of manuals that we can use in our work in phytosanitary capacity development in Africa. And Sonia's already answered one of my questions, which is whether we could get hard copies, because they look like they're really nicely produced, and it's always nice to actually give out the hard copy, isn't it? But you've already answered that. So in fact, we're just starting an Australian-funded project on plant biosecurity capacity development. So I take your challenge to see whether we can print some under that project. I've got a question, and that's how are these manuals related in any way to the PCE? The PCE attempts to identify needs, capacity development needs, and I guess these manuals are one of the pieces of the jigsaw of building that capacity. But I wondered whether there was any sort of more direct linkage, whether the manual, for example, could say, well, if you're thinking about looking at your NPPO structure, go and do module whatever it is in the PCE. You see what I mean? I'd be interested to know whether there's been thinking along those lines.
Yeah. In preparing these manuals, I did recognize the question on how the PC might be useful in some of these situations. And I recall at one of the meetings, we did argue that. And I think especially for those who are now establishing an institution, maybe the PC is not very relevant at this point. But if you have something already established and you're measuring your growth, or you want to measure how you get from A to B, then yes, the PC, I think, could be a good accessory to that process.
Okay. You are right that there is a linkage for sure, because at the end, with the PCE or with this type of capacity development materials, what we are looking for is to implement the convention and the standards. And the PCE is a kind of self-evaluation, but at the same time, the central questions that you have in the PCE questionnaire are also the central questions that need to be addressed in the manuals. And to tell the truth, when the CDC selected which were the priorities in terms of the issues to be covered for the manuals, the CDC took into account information coming from the past applications of the PCE, as well as new information coming from the implementation review and support system. Then there is a natural linkage, okay, between both.
Thank you all so much. We're running out of time and want to make sure you get to plenary on time. So before you go, Anna has a long list of thank yous that's only partial so far because it does not yet include many of you, and we look forward to including all of you in the next steps. But I'll let Anna begin.
We really need to do this because there is a lot of cooperation that is not perceived from the outside, and we need really to rise. First, thank you to Jeff, our permanent support. It's good to have the former officer on capacity development always supported you from the back. Okay, it's excellent, a kind of security system. Thank you to the CDC for the very hard work. And we need to recognize specifically Vietnam, because Vietnam was the first country to generously offer to host the meeting in which we developed the first drafts of these manuals. And we always have appreciated a lot your supportive opinion on the experience that you have hosting this is not bad. Take that into account. You can host further meetings in development of other manuals and other activities. Contracting parties in your PowerPoints, in your presentations, and in your materials. Okay, and also remember, think about what you prefer, the beetle, the larva, because you need to vote during the cocktail because we need to select the winner. And please, no hooligans, no support to the picture of one continent, a country, a region, okay? Because all of them are really lovely. Thank you very much for your attendance. You are welcome.